Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy Xehther here, back at it again to drop What If Deku was Kaidos Reincarnation, a video that has been long requested for a long time, but I just never got around to it. That is, until today. So ladies and gentlemen, if you guys go on to enjoy this video, then please show as much support to it as possible. Thing is, it took me so much freaking time to make this one, but if even that isn't enough incentive, let me give y'all a little more. If this video manages to reach 2,000 likes, I'll begin working on a What If Deku had Katakuri's Devil Fruit video next. So good luck with that, and enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We begin our story with Izuku playing hide and seek with his mother. As Izuku would be searching for her, this is when suddenly she would jump scare him, going "Ah!" as Izuku would be terrified, leaping backwards before suddenly, poof! Green smoke would envelop the air as Izuku's entire body would have been covered in scales, and in fact, his entire body was actually changed into something else. Izuku was now in a hybrid dragon form, and as his mother would stare at him, she would say, "Izuku, you've unlocked your quirk." At this, Izuku looks at his tiny little dragon hands, and he's like, "Whoa, I'm a dragon! I'm just like you, Mom!" To which Izuku, getting super excited, would look at his mother like flying towards her, bumping her, causing her to hit the ground. She's like, "Izuku, you're a lot stronger than I thought you'd be." Izuku looking at his mom, apologizing before she would say that it's about time they would make their way to the quirk doctor. It's here where Izuku, in the back of the car seat, he would just be looking out the window, super excited, kicking his legs back and forward, wondering what the registry is gonna, call his quirk. And as Izuku would make his way into the office, a doctor would walk inside holding some papers with a big bright smile, telling his mother, the hero Ryukyu in this timeline, that there's great news. It was just like she said, Izuku developed a dragon quirk, but he would pause before saying that there's actually more, going on to explain that not only did Deku get her quirk, but actually a rare combination of his father's quirk as well. He goes on to explain that Izuku has fully manifested the properties of a dragon, having the ability to not only become giant like one, but breathe fire. She would be stunned, going, "What? Not even I can do that." As she would look at her son, patting him on the head, Izuku being like, "I can breathe fire," attempting to do it, but unable to transform into his quirk. It's here where the doctor would smile, telling him that he is gonna be a great hero one day, before asking how old he is and if he's a late bloomer. But Ryukyu would say, no, he's not a late bloomer, he's just big for his age. Doctor being like, "What? How old is the kid?" For her pretty much explaining to the doctor that the boy was actually 4 years old. Him stunned because he had thought he was like 10 years old or something. He's freaking big for his age, you would think. And Ryukyu would say, "Yeah, I know, he's a bit big." At this, Izuku would make his way home with his mother, with us having a bit of a long time skip to Izuku turning 13 years old. It's here where it would be revealed that Izuku's going to a different school than this time altogether, due to the fact that he's the number, I think she's like a top 10 pro hero. This means that Deku would definitely live in a nicer area than the one that he's in originally, meaning there's no Bakugo in the story, but there is Momo Yaoyorozu, because due to Izuku being the son of a pro hero, this means his family would be, well, significantly loaded, and due to that, Izuku would go to the same school. I was thinking of either putting him with Todoroki, Ida, or Momo's school, but after a bit of thinking, I was like, let's just throw him into Momo's school since he'll probably do well there the most. And when I thought about putting him with Ida, I was like, I don't really want him to be friends with that kid, so. And then there was Todoroki, but I was like, him neither. So yeah, process of elimination. Anyways, with that being the case, Izuku would grow up with Momo, becoming good friends with her being one of the only people who isn't more so intimidated by Izuku. His massive stature, making him a bit of an outlier in the class, even amongst a, quirk superhuman society. And so as the years would pass, him and her would get really close, becoming incredible friends, and that's all they're gonna be in fact. Just because if I'm being honest, Kaido just doesn't give me the lovey-lovey vibes. Anyways though, as Izuku would be inside of his room lifting a couple of custom weights that he had to have made for himself, Izuku would think to himself that he would like to go to the gym where other people are present. So asking his father to drop him off, he would do just that, and Izuku would make his way inside of said gym. And once inside, Izuku would take a look around, seeing all the people working hard to lift these measly weights that Izuku had surpassed long ago. In fact, just after he unlocked his quirk, Izuku got crazy brute strength. Before he was just big, but he had the strength of a 4-year-old. But now it's just like, bro, like his quirk did something to him, you know? And as Izuku would be hitting different weight sets, trying to find a machine that could potentially, prove difficult for him, this is when Izuku would be doing maxed out lat pulls, doing like 1,000 reps of it before Izuku finally starts to feel something, just kind of like cracking his neck, people watching on just like, how's he doing that? Going to the leg press, maxing out the machine with as much weights as possible. Have you guys ever seen that video of like that one dummy who put like all the weights in the gym on the machine and it hurt him? That's what Deku was doing, but successfully. He wasn't hurting himself. And he was literally sitting there yawning. Everyone just like, how's he doing that? As Izuku would finally make his way to the bench press machine, loading the maximum amount of plates onto the bar, it literally bending as Izuku's, pushing it up and down. This is when suddenly re-racking the thing and just kind of sitting up thinking to himself that this was kind of lame. This is when out of nowhere, a red boy who had the courage to walk up close to Izuku, who, not gonna lie, looks a little intimidating, would say, dude, what quirk do you have? How do you have such freakish strength? Izuku replying, looking at Kirishima and saying, oh, I have a dragon quirk. It allows me to manifest my body into that of a dragon and I get to breathe fire. Kirishima's like, what? But that shouldn't change your base state. Izuku says, it doesn't. Kirishima being stunned, wait, dude, so that's your actual strength? You don't have super strength or anything? Izuku's like, not that I can think of. And Kirishima would be like, man, I'm so jealous of your quirk. Well, dude, you're awesome. If you ever need a training partner or something like that, let me know. I'm in the business of trying to become a hero, just as I bet you are. Izuku hearing that would say, oh, you're trying to become a hero too? And Kirishima would say, damn straight. I'm working really hard to make sure that I can be strong enough so that my quirk doesn't become a hindrance for me. As he would slightly harden his body at 13 years old, he's like having some of the hang of it at this point. Izuku sees and he's just like, that's pretty good. That's a pretty cool quirk. He thinks to himself that that's solid. It's kind of like how when he turns himself into his partial transformed state, getting the scales and stuff. Kirishima hearing this would thank Izuku, with Izuku, watching Kirishima walk off before then asking a question. You want to train with me sometime? Kirishima hearing that would say, do I? As they exchange info, and the very next day, Kirishima would actually be dropped off at Deku's house, where once inside, he would be introduced to Deku's weightlifting set, which is literally like 10 times heavier than that of the stuff that was at the normal gym. Kirishima is stunned. He's like, dude, how did you live? Matter of fact, how do you afford this? Izuku goes on to explain that his mother is actually the number, let's go 7 hero Ryukyu. Kirishima being stunned, that must be nice, having a pro hero as a parent. Wait, that's why you have that incredible quirk, he would say. Izuku looking to Kirishima and saying, yup. And as Izuku would be lifting the weights and Kirishima would go towards the dumbbell, the lightest one literally being 300 pounds, he's just like, I guess I could use this for deadlifts. Holding it from both sides and picking it up. But this is when suddenly Izuku's mother Ryukyu would come, and seeing that he was having a guest over, she would say, oh, you have a friend over? Izuku being like, yeah, I met him at the gym yesterday. Her saying that, yeah, training at the gym isn't beneficial, but it definitely helps bring friends. Izuku nodding as his mother would say, tell you this, kid. Looking towards Kirishima, she would say, Izuku actually has his normal weight sets that he used when he was about 5. If you want, I could let you use those. Kirishima hearing that is just like, what? You mean 5? This man is just he's practically crying on the inside. This dude literally maxed out normal weightlifting machines at 5 years old. That's insane, bro. That's not okay. And, she ruffles his hair. She's like, don't feel too bad, kid. My son is just a freak of nature. As she would hug Izuku, saying, isn't that right? And him looking down at his mom, kind of hugging her back awkwardly, would say, yep. At this, Kirishima and Deku would actually begin training every day as time would slowly begin to pass, and with the passage of time would come him eventually meeting Momo, the three working out every now and then, but seeing as Momo's priorities aren't necessarily on getting stronger, she doesn't really tend to train with the two as much. But Kirishima, he does a lot of training with Deku, not only because it's like a private gym and he has goals to aspire to, but Deku helps him greatly in the department of his hardening quirk. Because keep in mind, having the effect of being able to harden himself means that Kirishima would be able to actually work as a human boxing bag for Deku, who has to hold back significantly, but this is beneficial for both of them because normal boxing bags rip way too easily, and Kirishima needs to get his hardening stronger. So this is like a two-way streak, making Kirishima unlock Red Riot Unbreakable way earlier than in the original, literally before he even gets into UA, and still having 10 months left to train. All the while Deku, over the course of this time period, he would spend most of his time trying to figure out how to go into a partial transformation, something that Deku was never fully figured out, but he would accomplish after the 10-month training period would be over, which keep in mind, because Izuku isn't part of the Bakugo school that he would be originally, this means that he would not have an encounter with the sludge villain, meaning that Bakugo would never end up being captured, and All Might would never have it in his head to give the quirk to Deku. This means one of two things could happen. A, he would give the quirk to Mirio over the 10 months, or B, he would wait to see what the new recruits at UA were looking like. And I'm gonna be opting for decision B, but not necessarily because Deku's gonna get the quirk, because I just don't believe he needs it, but because somebody else will. But that's besides the point. This is when the time period would come in the story where Izuku would be ready to take the UA entrance exam. And as Izuku and Kirishima would both be dropped off to take it, this is when Izuku would tell his mother he's actually going to be taking it the normal path. Her simply nodding and telling Izuku that she knew he would, which is why she actually never even recommended him. So Izuku, feeling a little betrayed that his mom never even tried, would be like, I guess. Walking inside of the area with Kirishima, like being very significantly shorter than him, since Izuku at this point in the story, mind you, only 14, would be 7'6", not the other one, which I'm not even gonna say, but 7 feet 6 inches tall. That's pretty massive. And now I know some of you guys might be like, hold on now, Xehther. Kaido's like 23 feet tall. Bro, I'm not making Deku 23 feet tall. That is just ludicrous. There's no reason why somebody should be that tall. I made him a little taller than Wemby, and I think that's good enough. And a little more than All Might, which I think, let's be real here. But anyways, that said, this is when the entrance exam section would start, and Deku would ace the normal section of the test just because, keep in mind, he's friends with Momo Yaoyorozu, who people during UA were literally studying with her, and that was the thing helping them pass. So with Izuku already being a smart kid in general, plus, pretty much studying with her, there's just no real reason bro would fail. And so the actual, what's the word I'm looking for? The actual practical section of the exam would begin with Izuku making his way outside, everybody kind of just staring at it, being like, whoa, who's he? I wonder what kind of quirk he has. Do you know who that is? People would start whispering, but as Izuku would hear all of the murmurs, he would simply focus on one thing: the moment that the test would begin. So as President Mike would go, 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 there's no countdowns in a real fight, Izuku would be off, lunging over the gate of UA, not even bothering to run towards it, before then landing in front of not a 0-pointer, but a 1-pointer, and bam, plunging his fist straight into the body of that thing, pulling it out as the entire thing would explode before him, and Izuku would smirk. At this is when Izuku would start destroying the robots in his humanoid form, not even in his half transformed state, as he would function like a wrecking ball. This is when finally, having defeated a 3-pointer, Izuku would use its arm like a freaking baseball bat, proceeding to just destroy a multitude of robots, him thinking that was quite fun. As he would then hear the sounds of rumbling, seeing the gigantic 0-pointer President Mike had explained during the presentation, Izuku thinking to himself that might just work for his second stage. Izuku transforming into his partial form before then breathing in and shooting a massive beam of flames towards the direction of the zero pointer. He would literally melt the zero pointer's top half as it would tumble over, and Izuku, wiping his mouth, would proceed to say that was fun, cutting loose for a bit when suddenly the sound of the test all being over and President Mike's voice would ring through the announcements. And that's it for the test today, guys. Your acceptance letters will be mailed to you guys within a week, but it's safe to say there's a couple people who've clearly passed the test. Izuku hearing that would smirk, as Ryukyu, watching in the the viewers booth, having witnessed Izuku whip that power out, would be smirking. All the while the teachers would be like, "What?" at the fact that somebody had done that much crazy stuff during the exam. This is when Ryukyu would say, "That's my boy," with them all being like, "That's your son, Ryukyu?" And her being like, "Of course it is. Don't you see the quirk, the resemblance?" And they're like, "Yeah, he transformed into something," but Nezu would say, "Yep, that is Ryukyu's quirk. He has a very interesting quirk. It allows him to become a full-fledged dragon, but from what she's explained, that's simply but a partial transformation." The heroes around being like, "So you mean to tell me the boy could be even stronger?" All Might hearing this and thinking that this just might be the candidate he was looking for. And so, with that, he would go on to go over to Ryukyu and ask her privately if there was any way he could actually speak with her son, saying that it was something urgent and he would want to talk to her about it first. And so, All Might explaining to Ryukyu what his business actually was and why he wanted Izuku to become the successor, Ryukyu would say she understands, saying that she'll let Izuku make that call. And so, meeting with Izuku a few hours later, this is when Izuku would look towards his mother asking what's up, before All Might would finally make himself known, buffing up into his big state. Izuku being like, "All Might, that's you?" in a very deep voice, All Might being like, "Haha, I am," looking at Izuku's face, who looks kind of very dead serious. "Here?" he would say, being a little intimidated, damn, he didn't realize how tall he was, but he's even bigger than he is, he would think. As Izuku would ask All Might what he's doing here, All Might would say that he was here to actually speak to him. Izuku saying it's an honor, literally bowing before looking at All Might once again, saying that he's been keeping up with his hero career for years, and just being in his mere presence is literally just an honor. All Might would smile, realizing that the kid just looked intimidating, but he was a good kid. After this, he would go on to explain what business he had with Izuku, telling him about the power of One for All, his injury, and the fact that he needs a successor. And when he would be done speaking, Izuku would finally say, "All Might, I'm honestly flattered that you would consider me for the quirk, but I don't think that I need it. Sorry, let me just not do the voice, because I can't do that. Anyways, I don't need it," he would say. All Might saying, "Why? You would be unstoppable with my quirk. There'd be nobody that could..." As Izuku would say, "Exactly. I already sometimes feel like I am unstoppable with my quirk. And I don't know if it would help me to just have more power. Wouldn't that just make me a walking disaster?" All Might hearing this would nod, saying that he guesses he understands, but he wants to be sure Izuku understands what he's saying no to. He'd be his successor. Izuku would say he knows, and as much as it breaks his own heart to say no, he thinks it's just the more responsible decision to not take the quirk. Before telling All Might that all hope isn't lost though. If he's looking for a successor, he might just be able to help. All Might raising an eyebrow as Izuku would call someone on FaceTime. Kirishima seeing All Might would be like, "What? You're with All Might?" As Izuku would tell Kirishima everything, and Kirishima would arrive within 30 minutes. After this, All Might would go on to explain more in depth about what being his successor actually means, and Kirishima now finally understanding that it wasn't just being trained by him, but literally being given his quirk. He'd be like, "All Might, that's such an incredible honor. Are you sure you want to give it to someone like me? I mean, I have a hardening quirk, but other than that, my quirk isn't really flashy, and I don't know if I could live up to you." But All Might would smile, saying that somebody that not only young Izuku, but even his mother Ryukyu would say that they would place their faith in 100%, he trusts. So he would tell Kirishima that before he gives him his quirk, he would want to spend some time training with him to see if he really has what it takes. And so for the following rest of the day, he trains with Kirishima, putting, a couple of things to the test, as eventually by the end of the day, he's pretty much convinced. Yeah, this kid, he's a great person. He proceeds to rip out a hair going, eat this. Kirishima would be like, huh? Before then just gobbling it down, wondering why it tasted like that. All Might would say that he uses a lot of hair product. Kirishima just kind of like being like, gross, All Might, as suddenly he feels the power of One For All coursing through his veins. Now I know normally it's not instant, but remember that one movie where Bakugo got the power instantly? We're gonna go with that. Anyways, he feels the power coursing through his veins, and as he would harden, he feels the sparks of One For All charging through his body. Izuku feeling the power from Kirishima, just like standing nearby, he would ask just how far he can push the strength. And so Kirishima tensing his muscles, like almost like flexing in his hardened state, would cause like an aura around him to start formulating. Izuku wondering just how strong that is, questioning Kirishima on whether he could take a full strength punch now. And with Kirishima's quirk being amplified thanks to the properties of One For All being a literal stockpiling quirk, this would increase his hardening so much so to the point where bro is literally as hard as diamond. So with Izuku reeling his fist back, not in his partial transform state, but just his bare brute strength from the quirk amplifying him, he would hit Kirishima, actually causing his knuckles to start bleeding, being stunned. Not only had Kirishima became hardened, but the added strength made it so that Kirishima wasn't sent flying like you would have expected him to. In fact, his body only moved 10 feet, stunning Deku, who would be completely shocked. He managed to take that blow, and it actually kind of stung for his own fist, looking down at it and seeing the bruised, bloody state it was in. He would ask Kirishima how he would fare up against this form, his body growing by 2 inches, muscles bulging, the dragony scales appearing, as he would reel his arm back, and All Might would say, "Wait, young Midoriya," but before he could even stop him, Izuku would punch Kirishima square in the stomach, sending bro flying to the other side of the beach. It's here that Deku, looking at his fist coated in his dragon scales, would smirk, seeing that Kirishima was upright. This was the first time Izuku would send a punch towards Kirishima, and the dude didn't just instantly pass out, if not practically cave into a wall. Izuku would smile as he would yell out, "Kiri, you ready for the next blow?" To which Kirishima would say, "Go for it!" Charging up One For All throughout his entire body, his maximum output, his bones on the inside of his armored skeleton, like literally starting to creak, as he reeling his own fist back, knowing that they're about to clash. Both titans would rush towards each other, and just before their fists could collide, we would hear a barely audible All Might in the background going, "No!" as both fists would clash, and boom! Like a gigantic tidal wave would be created by the nearby sea, and all the trash in that area would literally have blown by so far. Mind you, the beach wasn't clean, like it was covered in dirt. That said, as everything would clear and the clouds in the sky would literally have parted, think like on some straight up like Whitebeard versus Roger type timing. This is when All Might's sitting there looking at the two boys whose fists were both like equally clashing with each other. Deku, having used all of like 50% of his dragon form, would smirk up at Kirishima, who smiles back at All Might saying, "What were you two thinking?" before telling Kirishima that one more of those and he'll be taking that quirk back. Kirishima would immediately bow down face to the ground, going that he is so sorry. He just got so excited. All his life, well, since he's known Deku, he would clarify, he's been losing to Deku in head-on-head clashes, and the dude's barely been trying. It just, I guess he got a little ahead of himself. He wanted to show that maybe he could keep up with Deku to himself. Deku would smile, saying that not quite. He was still only going 50%, and Kirishima would look at him with this look of just like, "Bro, you're a freaking beast." Kirishima having been using literally 40% of his One For All output in that moment, although while Izuku was barely going 50% in his 50% power, so really that's like 25% of everything he can truly muster, because his dragon form, oh man, it brings out the best of Deku. But regardless, after the apology would finally be said and done, All Might and Deku would hypothesize about that interaction that had happened prior to that blow. And with Izuku and All Might both pretty much just coming to the same conclusion that maybe his quirk has a little more to it than he's realized, they would leave it at that. After this would happen, Izuku would go on to dab Kirishima up, telling him that it's going to be awesome having someone on par with him. All Might listening as he's just like, "You know, I'm right here, right?" Izuku looking at All Might and saying, "Oh, All Might, you don't count. I would never fight you. You're the pinnacle of power." All Might kind of like blush and be like, "Oh, you stop it. To which Deku, looking towards All Might, would tell him, "Besides, win or lose against you, you're still Japan's symbol of peace." At this, All Might would be like, win? Huh? Bro thinks he could win against me? That thought would ring in his head the whole time. And as All Might would think about it more, low-key, bro's competitive instincts would kick in and he would low-key be craving a fight against Deku. But he would hold himself back, recognizing that the boy was just saying that to say it. There's no way the kid's really as strong as he was, right? He couldn't be, he would think. As then he would remember that clash that he had with Kirishima, thinking if he could have done that. But then scoffing that and thinking, no, I'm just imagining things. All Might would go back to his normal things, and it would be here that we would finally jump cut to the first day of UA. After everything would be all said and done, we would zoom into Izuku, Kirishima, and Momo all sitting down in their desks. Meanwhile, 2 rows ahead of them would be Bakugo and Ida arguing. Ida saying, "Get your feet off that desk, that is UA property." Although Akatsuki would say, "Huh? You gotta stick up your butt or what, kid? Can't wait to knock you down a peg or two." All the while Izuku, Momo, and Kirishima would stare, Momo just being like, some people have no class. And Izuku sort of just kind of waving that thought off, not really caring. All the while in the background, we would see Kaminari and Mineta being like, he's so lucky. Look at him sitting next to that hot babe. Izuku having like a terrifying expression to everybody else because he was just born with like a very aggressive looking mean mug expression. And as this would be happening, this is when Aizawa would suddenly stand up going, settle down. At UA, there will be no playing around. We've got 3 years to mold you into the perfect heroes, so start acting like UA students. As everybody would immediately quiet down, and he would say, put these on and meet me outside. To which Uraraka would say, but what about orientation? Aizawa was saying, what about orientation? At UA High, our teachers are allowed to run our classes we see fit. And I don't think orientation is helping you much. So instead of receiving undeserved praise for doing the simple act of making it to the school, you're all gonna be put to the test. Now meet me outside and don't make me repeat myself. Everybody changing as they would all step outside, and here, Kaminari and Izuku would both look at each other smirking, knowing that pretty soon, Momo was about to catch the craziest surprise of her life. That said though, this is when Aizawa would finally make his way towards the rest of the students, telling them that he's glad they finally got something right, tossing the ball towards Izuku and telling the students to pay close attention. He would look at the boy telling him to use his quirk and not hold anything back, to which Izuku transforming into his partial state, then believing that that's the maximum capability of Izuku, before he then reels his arm back, obviously not wanting to transform into a gigantic kaiju dragon, which not even Kirishima has seen. Bro reels his arm back and just that thing flies miles and miles. Like, it's actually insane how far it goes. As I was showing the rest of the class and them all just being like, he's a monster. All the while Kirishima and Momo were both just like, as expected. Kirishima thinking, I thought he was going to throw it a bit farther. But then as everybody else would go, them getting excited, Aizawa would once again throw up the idea that one of them could be expelled, depending on their performance here. And with that being the case, this is when out of nowhere, Kirishima being like the 7th person to take the ball throw text next, this is when bro reels his arm back, charging up 40% of one for all in his hardened arm, as bro proceeds to launch the ball just as far as Izuku, shocking the rest of the class, who would all think, there's no way. With us then getting a little bit of a zoom in on Kirishima's arm, it actually having gotten badly bruised and fractured from how much actual strength he put into it. Because in that moment, bro wanted to show that he could keep up with Deku, even if it meant he had to hurt himself and go way past his normal limiter. That being the case, this is when Momo seeing that would be like, Kirishima, when did you? Kirishima smirking, like kind of wiping his nose, and Izuku kind of smiling as well. To which she would just look at him dumbfounded, and both of them would say, we'll tell you after class. After this happens, they would go on to take the rest of the events, Izuku confidently placing in first place due to the crazy brute strength and speedy combination he had to go along with that. At this, Kirishima would be in 2nd place, Momo would find herself in 4th, Todoroki in 3rd, and Bakugo in 5th, I want to say, right? 5th, like 5th place. Yeah, no, 5th is probably right. Anyways, with that being said, Aizawa turning towards Deku and Kirishima, he would kind of give them like a nod, not really saying much more than that. All Might watching from the corner, she's just like, they performed perfectly. As Aizawa would say, you know those two? And All Might would be like, I don't know what you're talking about, Aizawa. Him saying, it's no wonder they're so strong. They're your favorites for a reason, huh, All Might? I'll be expecting great things from them. Make sure you teach them well. Don't make them All Might clones. To which he would walk away, and then we would zoom into Momo and the two boys at a random little cafe area. It's here where Momo would say, okay, I need to know what happened. Please tell me. And both of them looking towards each other would smirk before they go on to tell her everything, giving all the scoop about the All Might situation, their little fight, their clash, how Kirishima got so strong, her being like, what? You're the successor? And then be like, shh, before saying, wait, so then you're the successor of All Might? As Kirishima would nod alongside Deku, and she would say, wait, but doesn't that mean that Deku recommended you over me? As the mood would shift immediately, and Deku looking towards Momo, recognizing that, his friend who's too shy for confrontation isn't gonna say why. But Izuku simply just looks at Momo and tells her the truth is, he needed the quirk more than she did. She should take it as a compliment. The reason he suggested Kirishima was because his hardening limited his abilities as a hero, but her? She could make anything that she wants. Her quirk could literally create doomsday devices if she wanted. And so Momo hearing that, a little bit of praise from Deku, and even Kirishima saying Deku's right, that before this, he was honestly the weakest in the group, she would start smiling before nodding, saying, I guess so. At this, everybody would finally go home, and we would now jump cut to the next day at UA. Here is where All Might, bursting through the door like a normal person, much like in all my other videos, would walk inside going, I am here! Everybody getting super excited at the prospect of All Might literally teaching their classroom, to which they would get even more excited when Bro proceeds to give the scoop that not only is he teaching their class, but they're about to have some pretty cool training exercises, telling them all about the 2v2 mock battles, the hero and villain system, and allowing them to select their teammates. As Izuku would go over towards the box about to draw the name he was paired with, this is when, as he pulls it out and looks towards Kirishima, All Might's face would completely drain of color, realizing that those two just got matched up against each other. And he would think, oh no, I'm gonna get in trouble for the destruction. He would then go over towards both of them whispering, don't go too crazy, or we're going to have to stop the battle. To which both of them would nod, telling All Might to relax, that they're not going to take things too crazy. All Might at this would say, I hope not. And this is when both boys' respective teammates would be revealed. For Kirishima, it would be Bakugo, and for Deku, it would be Mineta, who, looking towards the hulking man in front of him, the size difference being monumental, would say, well, I wanted to get one of the girls, but at least this way it's a guaranteed win. I mean, with this big brute, there's no way I can fail, right? As he would look questioningly towards the boy, who looking down at Mineta would tell him not to worry, giving him a big thumbs up. This is when Deku would proceed to grab this iron black club. As wearing a Kaido costume, literally frame by frame the same thing, Bro makes his way towards the direction of the building, ready to capture that bomb and defeat his rival in Kirishima. As the test would begin, both Izuku and Kirishima both think about how each other's gonna react, when suddenly Kirishima would be interrupted by Bakugo, who says, guard the bomb, red hair, blasting off in an attempt to go find Deku and show him who's boss, after having been embarrassed by the fact that he felt so much stronger than him. In this moment, all Bakugo wanted to do was show that he could keep up with Deku. In fact, he wanted to prove it to himself, not everyone else. And as the boy would be blasting through the corridors, finally hearing the footsteps of Kaido or Deku, this is when, blasting towards him with his most powerful explosion, he would yell out, die! However, as the smoke would clear, Bakugo would see that Izuku had taken no damage, and then, just as he would realize that, a fist would be driven into his stomach, shooting him into the wall and leaving him completely unconscious. Mineta, seeing this, would say, you knocked him out with one punch! terrifying, he would say, as suddenly Kirishima, having been chasing after Bakugo that whole time, would reel his fist back saying, "Don't do that to my teammate!" before clashing with Deku, both of their punches causing that entire building to start shaking as the floor that they were on would literally collapse, both of them looking towards each other, realizing that they just made a big mistake. But this is when, realizing that there's no turning back now, the two would then start clashing, going at about 10% only since they didn't want to completely wreck the building. And as fists would go flying, Izuku versus Kirishima just going absolutely crazy, Mineta would watch on going, "What's going on? This is insane," literally crying in the background, all the while Bakugo finally looking up, waking up with all the rumbling, seeing Kirishima and Deku go at it, would realize that he's the extra. As Izuku, finally having enough of this clash, grabbing that metal gigantic bat thing, would swing it at Kirishima, sending him crashing out of the building, him grabbing Mineta and literally throwing him into the upper floor as Mineta, with both of his little great balls, connects to the bomb, and we would just hear All Might in the intercom go, "Hero team wins." Him just face sunken, because that was supposed to be the battleground for everyone, not just these two, would be worried about what's gonna happen to him. But luckily, nothing does, seeing as the real thing that UA was worried about was people getting seriously injured, and since nobody did, they're just fine. I mean, obviously Bakugo has a fist-shaped bruise on his stomach, but apart from that, Mineta's fine, Kirishima's fine, Deku's fine, so hey, let's call it a win and leave it at that. Anyways, that said, after the school day would be over, Kirishima would rush over towards Bakugo, seeing him look very disheartened at the sight of that battle. Kirishima trying to cheer him up and saying, "Hey, Gachan, before you leave, I just want to let you know that you shouldn't feel too bad about losing to Deku since..." But before he could finish that sentence, Bakugo would say, "Shut up," as he would just walk off, Kirishima feeling bad, recognizing that there was just nothing he could do for Bakugo in that moment. After finding out that somebody like Deku exists, he doesn't really blame him, since it'd be disheartening for anybody. And so, with that being the case, school would just come and go, nothing really crazy happening. I mean, apart from the reporter incident that does still go on, until eventually we would finally find ourselves on the day of the USJ, as we would zoom into Deku and Kirishima, both talking in the back, all the while the Hero 13 would be giving her speech. This is when, out of nowhere, a portal quirk would arrive in the center of the USJ, giving his own little introduction and then teleporting a horde of villains in. At this sight, Aizawa would instantly lunge down, telling 13 to take care of the kids. Seeing this and recognizing that Aizawa was truly intending on taking all of this down by himself, Kirishima and Deku would both ready themselves. However, before they could lunge towards the direction of Kurigiri, two portals would appear, sucking them through it, Izuku falling into a lake of water, him swimming back out, because remember, he didn't eat a devil fruit, it's a quirk. As he getting onto the boat, he would literally cause it to tip over slightly to that side, as he would look down towards the side of the villains, catching a glimpse of Tsuyu and Mineta, both of them then making it to the boat, as Izuku would ask what their plan is. Tsuyu would say that she can't really help too much in this situation, and Mineta would explain what his quirk is. At this, Izuku, grabbing both of them, would then toss them towards the direction of where the rest of the heroes are, Tsuyu using her tongue to latch onto Mineta, and Mineta using his sticky balls to create a landing zone. Both of them, except for Mineta, mainly Tsuyu, would get stuck to that, and she would say, "Thanks, Mineta." The purple boy-haired individual landing right on top of her as he starts coping a squeeze. Tsuyu's face going bright red, smacking Mineta away with her tongue as bro falls unconscious, literally from a tongue snap. Anyways though, that said, as Deku would now be left alone with all of the rest of the people inside of the sea, Deku would transform himself into his hybrid dragon form, which augments the size of him and the actual overall weight, as he, leaping into the air, proceeds to literally cannonball so hard, mind you, that all of the villains get sent immediately to the shore, and the water inside of that thing would be gone. It's nowhere to be found. After Izuku would get up from that little crater he would have created, Izuku would look toward the direction of Aizawa, as noting that he was clearly having a difficult time with the villains, Izuku would decide to rush over there. However, he wasn't the only one with that idea. Kirishima would come in flying, as he would punch directly into one of the villains, and another one rushing towards him with a fist quirk that allows him to grow giant hands, punches Kirishima. However, he literally fractures his hand and Kirishima says sorry before then kicking bro in the stomach, sending him flying. Deku, seeing this, would low-key think to himself that Kirishima's just too much, as suddenly he would watch on as Kirishima scratching at his neck would say, "Nomu, kill that brat!" The Nomu rushing towards Kirishima as it would punch him with all of its might, but Kirishima wouldn't even move. He would simply look toward the Nomu, doing the "you seeing this guy?" before then punching bro in the stomach, sending him crashing towards the direction of Deku. Deku then grabbing his bat and quite literally team rocketing the Nomu with one blow. As the Nomu would be sent crashing out of the USJ, Izuku and Kirishima would both turn towards Shigaraki, who at this point is just thinking to himself, "I've made the biggest mistake of my life." And then, before he knows it, bro is just straight up knocked out. Bakugo capturing Kurigiri before he could even escape, telling him the same thing he did in canon, saying that if he moves, they'll be cleaning him up for weeks. So, with both villains having been captured and Aoyama on the scene having seen the whole thing, he would report to All For One what had taken place, the capturing of his protege, and how badly the plan went due to Kirishima and Izuku. And so, All For One, recognizing that unless he can get his protege back before they go to Tartarus, this endeavor would be way more difficult. This is when, as the cleanup would be happening and Shigaraki and Kurigiri would be taken away in vans, a black sludgy substance would appear, All For One stepping out from it, as All Might, having already arrived, would scream out, "All For One! I knew you were behind this!" lunging towards the villain, who would put up a few barriers, saying that he would love to chat, but he has something to take care of, before warping away with Kurigiri and Shigaraki, as All Might would yell out, "No!" having realized that his biggest enemy was still out there. And so, with Izuku and Kirishima both being present to watch that, they would question who that was. Izuku even implying that he had felt such horrible aura coming off from him, as All Might would tell him that he is the very thing that his quirk was made to fight against. He's the symbol of evil, known as All For One. And as both boys would hear that, Kirishima would break the silence, telling All Might not to worry, that the stronger he gets, the harder it's gonna be for that guy to get away the next time he shows up. All Might smiling and telling Kirishima and Deku that he'll tell them more about it later, but for now, they need to go home. After these events would take place, the students would then return back to UA after about a week, and they would be informed of the sports festival. Izuku being pretty excited to showcase his powers to the world and make not only himself known, but make his mother proud. He's gonna get to showcase to the world something that she hasn't really said a lot of. Many people don't actually know that she has a son, and the reason for that is because she never wanted Deku to grow up in her shadow. So, Izuku's finally gonna have his chance to say, "I am here." And we would begin everything off with a speech from Izuku, which we're gonna glaze over, followed by the race, the obstacle course. And this is actually something that I can see being pretty freaking interesting, because both Izuku and Kirishima would stare off at each other, wondering who was gonna win this, seeing as obviously Deku has monstrous power, but speed is one thing that he's lacking in a little bit, at least when it comes to his hybrid form, not in his dragon form. In his dragon form, bro can move. Like, that's all I'm gonna say. But anyways, that being the case, as Deku would look towards the direction of Kirishima, both of them would stare at each other, and before Todoroki could even use his ice quirk to cause some people to get stuck into it, Deku and Kirishima would blast off so freaking hard, it blows everybody back, and Todoroki's ice literally shatters. Todoroki being blown back, just eyes widening as he's like, "What the?" Bakugo having been blown back as well, him yelling out, "I won't be beaten," as he shoots explosions trying to catch up. But as much as he's trying, bro's literally hurting his own arms to try to keep up, he's just no match for them. Izuku and Kirishima would tear through every zero pointer in their path, leaving a trail of zero pointers in their wake before leaping over that section of the little exam where they had to jump over it. And once they would get to the minefield, both Deku and Kirishima would smile, turning towards one another, recognizing that they were about to run straight through it. And that's exactly what they did, stepping on the mines without a care in the world, the mines literally doing no damage to them. As Deku and Kirishima would make their way towards the finish line, this is when Kirishima would up his 1-for-all percentage just a bit, and bam, he would cross it just a little before Deku, kind of pissing him off that he was hiding that in the back pocket, but understanding that, yeah, Kirishima operates via percentages. Anyways, once that would be over and the cavalry battle would be announced, Izuku, hearing that, would go over towards Kirishima saying that they're going to be teammates, right? Kirishima would nod saying, heck yeah, they're going to be needing somebody to carry them around, as Izuku would roll his eyes, having known that that would be his role. Kirishima would be on top, Momo being a support, with Mei Hatsume being on the team just because she wasn't taking no for an answer. That said, the team would pass considering the fact that I hate this section of the test. Like, I genuinely despise the cavalry battle with all my being, so we're just gonna jump into the 1v1 battles instead, with Deku's first opponent being Hitoshi Shinso. As Izuku would step onto the ring, he would look towards his opponent, wondering just what his quirk is, because the boy didn't look scared. In fact, before it even all began, he was saying a whole lot of stuff to Deku, trying to get him to speak, but due to Deku's more reserved nature, it wouldn't really work. That is, until Shinso would say something that would actually get under Izuku's skin, causing a little bit of an out of character moment, as Izuku would say, "Why you?" rushing towards the direction of Shinso, who would be low-key kind of scared because bro was moving 2 steps and he was already like 1 foot away from him. But luckily, Izuku was now under his control, and as Shinso would stare at Deku, he would smile, thinking that his gamble paid off. He was scared. His heart is literally thumping out of his chest, but it's here where he would say, "Step off the ring," and Izuku, straightening himself back up, would begin walking towards the edge of the ring. Izuku, feeling his body move without him telling it to, would start getting angry, going, no, I can't break the promise to Kirishima. Us having a flashback of both of them kind of like looking towards each other and saying, "I'll see you in the finals," after having realized that the brackets line up perfectly, and Deku having promised Kirishima that he would see him there no matter what. Deku's like, his desire to win and not lose would overtake him so incredibly hard that this man would actually release a blast of Conqueror's Haki. This beam of energy having hit Shinso, immediately knocking him out, causing Deku to snap back into his body, with a bunch of people in the stands having actually been knocked out. Some of the people mainly in the front rows, because that was the range of Izuku's blast that he would have let off. As Izuku would look around, he would look at Shinso, who was knocked out, wondering what happened, but he kind of does know. He felt a strange sensation before suddenly everything just went poof. But before Deku has more time to think about this is when present Mike would say, "And Izuku Midoriya is the winner!" Izuku, kind of like smiling towards the crowd, waving his hands a little bit, as he would make his way towards the waiting rooms, where there, his next opponent would tell him that he intends on not losing, then going over towards Kirishima and being like, "Are you all my secret love child?" Followed by the battle between himself and Izuku, which would be an absolutely one-sided stomp. Now, obviously Deku doesn't have his club here, but the moment that Todoroki shoots an icicle towards the direction of Deku, Izuku would transform into his dragon-like state, grabbing the ice and tearing it to shreds. This man would then proceed to shoot out a wind breath so powerful. Mind you, he's in his like half-transformed state, as the breath that he would literally shoot out from his lungs would be so pressurized that it shatters the ice before it even gets a chance to hit him, just like Deku's flicks would in the original canon timeline. This leaves Todoroki completely unable to play the safe distance game, and so Izuku, eventually getting up close towards Todoroki, would land a blow. Todoroki, completely unable to do anything about it, whether he had shot ice, fire, or anything else at him, would then be sent crashing towards the grass, where Izuku would lift his kaiju blue dragon scales up into the air, everybody just being like, "What? That's such a cool quirk!" As President Mike would say, "And that's the son of the number 7 hero Ryukyu for ya, Izuku Midoriya, or as we like to call him, the walking catastrophe." After this whole little hyped up section would happen for Deku, he would then smile, knowing that his next opponent is Ida before Kirishima. However, he would then be informed that his match was actually forfeited, and that he would be moving on to the finals. Deku would find this a bit weird, because Tenya is not the kind of person to just quit. But simply just thinking that he must have had his reasons, Izuku would wait for the final match, which would of course be him and Kirishima, after bro would absolutely whoop Bakugo in a 1v1 battle. That said, the battle would begin, and as Kirishima and Izuku both stare off at each other, they would both recognize that going all out or taking things too far could potentially be dangerous for the crowd. Having learned their lesson from that previous 2v2 battle, both would agree that they're going to keep things at, say, 15%. And so, both lunging towards one another, Deku in his dragon scale form, Kirishima in his ultimate hardened mode, his body being like freaking scales themselves. Like, this dude is literally diamond at this point. He's like that one dude from One Piece that was in the Marineford arc. Like, they clashed their fists, both of them creating like a sound of like iron being sharpened, and as both friends would hit their fists colliding, the battle would be electric. Everybody watching on, cheering on for Deku, some for Kirishima, asking how in the world these kids are that strong. People being like, these guys could be pro heroes, as Izuku would throw a punch straight towards the face of Kirishima, Kirishima then throwing an uppercut towards the face of Izuku. Both boys clashing their fists with then smiles. They go in again and again and again and again and again, but realizing that they're getting nowhere except providing an interesting fight, both back up, recognizing that this battle has to end one way or another. So, Deku deciding that he's gonna throw a slightly more powerful punch would look towards Kirishima, who he knows was about to do the same. And as both boys would lunge towards each other, reeling their fists back, Cementos recognizing what was about to take place would cause cement to pile up, like literally protecting all the bystanders, as the fists would shatter all of the cement that Cementos would have created, and like a beam of energy would be shot up into the sky. Izuku and Kirishima's fists having literally changed the weather in that moment. This is when, as Izuku would be like colliding with Kirishima, his fists attempting to push him backwards, his fists would suddenly be coated in this strange energy. It was visible to him, but apparently when he watched the video back like hours later, there was nothing there. Deku's fists would completely overwhelm Kirishima, sending dude flying into the wall and denting him into the walls of the the UA Sports Festival. All the while everybody would watch the aftermath, the smoke clearing, as they're like, and Midoriya won! Everybody just going nuts, like, oh, like he won, like he's the best, da, 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 da. And with that being said, Izuku obviously would get the medal, and then we would have all of the students go to class. This is where two things would happen. Number one, Deku would pick his hero name, which I'm going to be saying it's Kaido for this time, the natural, the dragon hero. Yeah, no, let's just go the dragon hero Kaido. That's gonna be a cool name. I was gonna say the walking disaster hero, but that doesn't sound very heroic, you know what I mean? So yeah, let's go with dragon hero Kaido. And as for his internship, obviously Deku's gonna go with his mom. I mean, who else is he gonna go with? So there's that. But due to that, this means that Ida is kind of on his own. Except he's actually not this time, because keep in mind, Kirishima being the successor of One for All means that more likely than not, he would probably go train with Gran Torino, and due to his hardening quirk and understanding of the power of full cowling, this means that when he would go out on that night patrol that would ultimately lead to the Nomu incident at Hosu, Kirishima would fare way better not only against the Nomus, but actually against Stain, considering that Stain's quirk would be completely nullified by Kirishima's hardened skin. This means that bro would be able to take the villain out with no problem at all, and all the while Izuku would be on the other side of the world working alongside his mother, where he would more so be learning how to run an agency and for the first time get to go out on a hero patrol with his mother, taking down a few villains, since for the first time in forever, Deku finally had the authority to be able to do that with his mom without getting her, suspended or fired or something. That said, as Izuku would come back to the agency, the sidekicks would be like, so Deku, did you finally catch your first villain? And Deku would smile, like telling them all that he actually did. They would all say that they knew he could do it and that really he could have been taking their job since he was like 8 years old. But Izuku would laugh, in a very kind way. Everybody just, giving him praise and noting that he looks even bigger than last time. Did he grow? At this point, Deku would look down, realizing that actually he did. Now, bro was 8 feet tall, and everybody staring at him would be like, just how much are you gonna grow, kid? To which Izuku, would kind of chuckle, saying that he doesn't know. Guess the quirk just mutated his body even more so. And with that being the case, the whole little internship stuff would finally be over, leading us now finally to the next part of the story, which is the final exam section of the story, which would actually be kind of semi-interesting in this timeline due to the fact that the opponents that Deku and Kirishima are going to have isn't just going to be one pro hero, but instead every pro hero. Considering just how strong these guys are, it wouldn't have even been fair to put just All Might against them at Nezu's, request, saying, All Might, well, I do believe you could probably hold your own against only one of these two. The truth is, both students have already far surpassed you, especially in your weakened state. And All Might hearing this, just like, yeah, I know. He's like in his Small Might form. Nezu would tell him, so what we're going to be doing is having all the teachers face off against them. And we're not necessarily going to be testing them to see if they can defeat them all. More so, we're going to be seeing how they handle dealing with so many opponents in an unfortunate situation. How would they react? How much destruction will they cause? All of that will be their true test. So All Might hearing this would nod, as we would now jump cut to every teacher, stepping up before them, like all of them having done the test with their own students at this point, as Izuku and Kirishima would wonder what their test is going to be like, knowing that they're probably going to fight All Might since he's the last one left. However, this is when suddenly All Might would nod no. 500-pound weights on his arms and legs, as he would say that they're actually going to be fighting all of UA's staff members. Izuku and Kirishima hearing this would be a bit stunned, Izuku having a little bit of a grin start forming on his face as he would think to himself that this is gonna be fun. But his pal Kirishima, honestly, he'd be a bit worried, because that's a lot of pro heroes. Yeah, maybe they're stronger and faster, but they've got technique, they've got years of experience, he would say. But Izuku would simply tell Kirishima not to worry. And so, this is when the exam would begin. All the heroes would have different roles. Aizawa's role would be very important, arriving first to get a dead look at Kirishima and Deku. The moment this happens, Kirishima would immediately be rendered quirkless, and having no access to either of his abilities would then quickly be started to be swarmed by the clone quirk of that one guy who can spit out random clones. At this moment, Izuku would go rushing towards him, trying to save his pal Kirishima. However, All Might come rushing in and hit Deku, pushing him backwards. His only goal to be to incapacitate Kirishima long enough for them to only need to focus on Izuku. But as Izuku would recognize what the teachers are doing, reeling his fist back, he would punch All Might into a building already in his kaiju-like form, rushing towards Aizawa before multiple layers of cement would be in front of him. However, smashing right through them, Izuku would eventually reach Aizawa as he would use his body as a battle ram, knocking him out immediately. However, the damage was already done. Kirishima was covered in layers of cement, and to make matters worse, the pro hero Midnight had used her quirk to knock him out. As Izuku would recognize this and would see all the gas rising in the air, cement rushing towards him as a bunch of clones would come out, and All Might getting back up would rush Izuku, Izuku would roar, then leaping up into the air as he would transform into a gigantic dragon, shocking everyone who would be like, how are we supposed to fight that thing? Izuku bellowing out a roar of flames from his mouth, as All Might looking at the boy would say, yeah, he surpassed me long ago. However, it's at this that Nezu's voice would ring out in speakers, him saying, that's enough. This test has reached levels that I'm not truly comfortable with allowing to continue. Izuku, please de-transform and make your way down here, and allow me to explain the purpose of this exam. He would then go on to break down the true purpose, telling Izuku that in a power department, he and Kirishima are unmatched. However, due to the matchup, for Kirishima, he had a hard time, but due to Izuku having that mutation quirk of his, he performed a lot better, and who knows, maybe he would have defeated all the faculty. Midnight would be sweating thinking maybe, as Izuku hearing this would then be told that the true purpose was to educate Izuku and Kirishima once he wakes up on the fact that they need to do their hero cleanup way more effectively, more efficiently, explaining that while they're incredibly powerful and truly will be able to handle the scariest of villains, their ability to cause mass destruction is going to probably cause a lot of hardships for the areas that they're going to be working in. So that was the point he was trying to get across. And as Izuku would hear that, he would nod, understanding what Nez was saying. That makes sense, Izuku would nod, saying that he will be working for the foreseeable future to make sure he can limit battle damage. Nezu would say that that's awesome and that both boys passed, regardless of the situation. Izuku nodding, as we then jump cut to the next thing that normally happens in the story. Remember that one mall incident where Shigaraki and Deku both end up meeting? Yeah, that thing. As the students would all be in the mall and Izuku and Kirishima would be the last ones remaining, Kirishima would say, what is that as he would run off with a group of by himself to go buy a brand new video game, Izuku just kind of being left there by himself, realizing, damn, my bro literally left me. Momo having gone off with a group of girls, since, you know, she was making different friends other than Izuku and Kirishima. They're still great buddies, but, you know, she's hanging out with her girlfriends. And so with that being said, Izuku would be left there as suddenly a hooded figure with a weird, strange colored looking hair that Izuku could recognize would near him. And once he would get up close so Izuku could recognize him, he would say, "It's you." Shigaraki waving his finger going, "We wouldn't want the civilians nearby to get injured now, would we?" As he would go on to reveal to Izuku that right now he has 4 hostages in the mall, and they're not even aware of it. If I wanted to, at the click of a button, my command would go off to Nomus, and you wouldn't be able to stop them all now, would ya? So sit down and listen to me. Telling Izuku that he's a real pain in his butt, explaining that his last encounter showed him something. "You know, I was caught quite off guard when you and that red-haired boy were capable of defeating the Nomu. So here's what we're gonna do. Because I'm not too much of a cheater, and I like to win the game fairly, here's my offer. Give me Kirishima at our next attack, or people are gonna suffer the consequences. It's your choice, hero," he would utter before leaving. At this, Izuku would be seething, having wanted to kill Shigaraki in that moment, never having thought he would experience feelings like that, but now it was vividly clear. Izuku was definitely capable of killing, if the situation called for it. That said, Izuku would not tell anybody about it, resolute on the fact that he would never turn over his friend, even if it meant saving other people. Because at the end of the day, more people will die. It's the lesser of two evils. And so with that being said, as they would go to the forest training camp, Izuku would low-key be a little bit on edge. With the time eventually coming for the villain attack, Izuku having let his guard down after days and days would have passed, us watching as Izuku would be wandering the forest alongside Tokiyami and Shoji. Meanwhile, his buddy Kirishima would actually have gone off after Koda, after recognizing the sad look in the boy's eyes, and finding him near a mountainside. It's there where the encounter with Muscular would happen, much like it would for Izuku, but much differently to how it would happen originally, where it's like a very hard fought battle. That would not be the case. And since this isn't what if Kirishima had one for all, but what if Deku was Kaido, I'm not really going to cover it. He wins, that's all you guys really need to know. But what would be going on with Deku in this moment is that as he would be in the darkness and a villain would arrive, you know, a lower tier villain, somebody that's just kind of like a throwaway character, Tokiyami would lose control over his quirk. Izuku instantly shooting a beam of flames towards the direction of Tokiyami, who would immediately be able to control Dark Shadow. And with that being the case, the group of boys recognizing that the attack has just started, Izuku knowing that Kirishima was obviously now in danger, he would transform into his gigantic kaiju form, recognizing that if Kirishima's captured and the villain somehow managed to get a hold of his quirks in some way, shape, or form, the world was going to be in danger. So Izuku in the air would bellow, terrifying all of the villains, who recognizing that that guy was clearly not on their side and was way more dangerous than they had ever imagined, would all retreat. This time, still having captured Bakugo, because mind you, Izuku wasn't on the lookout for him, he was on the lookout for Kirishima and trying to use his wind abilities or breath to pretty much shoot attacks towards the villain, which can hurt badly, because mind you, Kaido in One Piece was capable of letting out breath attacks that were like strong enough to literally shatter stone. So just saying, Deku most definitely would have taken out not Mr. Compressor, sorry, but Moonfish in this timeline. And as he would fly towards the direction of Kirishima, he would watch as Muscular would have been one shot by Kirishima, a smile appearing on his face as he would turn to see Dabi's blue flames and a purple misty portal. Izuku would then shoot a flame attack towards their direction. However, before it could hit, the villains would be gone, and so would Bakugo. Izuku, recognizing he let the villains get away with Kacchan, would let out a primal roar, shaking the forest as Izuku would blow air towards the flames that were currently engulfing it, placing it all out before going back to his normal form and hitting the ground with a loud crash. It's here where the heroes would thank Izuku for his efforts, Aizawa telling him that he's sure is glad he's on their side, as Izuku would say that they shouldn't be. He let the villains take him. Aizawa would ask who, and Izuku would reveal Bakugo. It's here where events in the story would actually start changing a lot from the original timeline, because keep in mind, Normally, Momo would have ended up putting that like little tracker on the Nomu, which would lead to like that whole situation where the heroes are all like, oh, like let's go capture him, or sorry, not heroes, but the students are like, let's go save Bakugo. But that doesn't happen in this timeline because unlike the original story, thanks to the intervention of not only the pro hero Ryukyu, All Might, but Gran Torino, who was the trainer of Kirishima, they would have a special request that both boys, who were clearly on the level of All Might in terms of strength, would be used as last resorts for this mission. And with Izuku and Kirishima being kept in the loop, they would inform their classmates of this, or at least the ones that they're actually close to, meaning Ida, Momo, and maybe let's throw in Kirishima, because Kirishima's close with Kaminari. But yeah, other than that, they're the only ones that know. So as the raid party would happen just like it would in the original, the students wouldn't be present watching the All for One stuff. Instead, Deku and Kirishima would be inside of like a van, as like there would be like a couple of cops there telling them to stay put, that they're not allowed to go out unless absolutely necessary. This is when the entire operation would go all wrong and stuff would start lining up with the original canon story. All Might arriving on the scene, starting to battle off against All for One, the news outlet capturing this, Izuku and Kaminari watching as their favorite hero and one of their greatest mentors was struggling. He couldn't use his full power, both of them would say, recognizing that not only was Bakugo there, making it hard for All Might to go all out, but there was actually still people nearby, and Izuku saying that he can't watch this. He's not gonna sit here and watch his favorite hero growing up just die. He would burst out of the van, with Kirishima following suit and Ryukyu having a smile on her face, knowing that her son was gonna get the job done. In fact, she's not sure why they waited so long. At this, both boys would go lunging towards that direction, Izuku immediately transforming into his dragon form, taking no chances against this villain that was clearly proving to be difficult for All for One. And as Izuku would arrive, using a bellow of breath, he would create a wind cyclone powerful enough to drag the villains away from Bakugo, all the while Kirishima would rush in saving him, before then turning towards the villains who were there, hardening and rushing towards Shigaraki. This is when he would be sent flying back by Magma's quirk, as Izuku would shoot a flame burst at all of the villains, recognizing that these are not just your typical run-in villains. These guys can genuinely cause havoc if they're left to run amok. So, doing something he didn't want to and potentially having the ability to kill them, Izuku would send a blast that would immediately incapacitate some and would literally hospitalize the rest with 5th degree burns. Some of them now look like literally Dabi. But as this would be happening, Izuku would then turn towards Kirishima, who would nod as he would rush towards All for One, smashing his face and breaking the mask. This is when All for One would clap before using his quirks, strength boost times 3, like using his whole thing that he does, like combining just a bunch of quirks, saying that all 3 of them combined would not defeat him. As Izuku would say, the 3 of us won't, shooting a burst of flames towards the direction of All for One, who using a wind quirk and various barrier quirks along with amplification quirks would attempt to keep the flames away. However, completely unable to do that, creating the perfect opening for Kirishima and All Might. Both men would reel their arms back, as similar to what happens in Two Heroes. Remember that one movie where All Might and Deku both land a blow on Wolfram, knocking him out? Like a double Detroit smash would be landed on bro's face, sending him crashing into a building where he gets completely knocked out. This is when Izuku would transform back into his hybrid form, still cautious as he would walk over towards the unconscious All for One, then towards All Might, to which All Might would pick up both the arms of Deku and Kirishima, looking towards the camera and saying that this is your next generation and that society is in the best of hands. Everybody just cheering, going, they did it, they won! All the while in the background, All for One would cackle. You think this is over, All Might? This is only the beginning. But All Might would look towards him and say, even if it is, these 2 will be here, so I'm not worried. As All for One would be dragged away cackling, and Izuku and Kirishima would ask, so what now? All Might saying, now you both bask in the limelight of being true heroes, as Izuku and Kirishima look towards each other and smile, having been credited with defeating the world's greatest villain. The end. Let me know what you guys thought about this one down below in the comments. I had a lot of fun working on this video on stream. It's still live and it took about 6 hours, I think, total for me to have finished this video. So now you guys have a bit of an understanding of how long it actually takes me to even record a 1-hour video, much less a 2-hour video, which adds another 2.5 hours to the time it already takes. It's kind of crazy making these videos for y'all boys. But anyways, that said, I love each and every single one of you guys. Please, please, please leave a like on the video if you've made it this far. And it has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Like it or die!
That wasn't the line, Kachan!
Whatever.